ICQ Podcast, episode 284, Workshop Projects. Well, hello fellow Amateur Radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this, our 284th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported by Luke Ulrich, Alpha Delta Zero Kilo India, Bob Terry, David Reed, Whiskey 6 Kilo Lima, along with our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Edmund, Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Bill, November 3 Juliet India X-Ray, to discuss latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a feature on workshop projects. Well, as always, it's your kind donations that keep this show advert free, and we'd like to thank this episode's donors. So we start off with Luke, Alpha Delta Zero Kilo India, and he says he's been listening to the podcast on and off for about 7 years and really enjoyed the content. Thanks so much for providing this service to us all. Whether it's on the commute to work, passing the time on a flight, or during a road trip, you guys are always there to entertain and inform. Keep up the good work. Thanks a lot there for your kind message, Luke. We really appreciate it. And your donation, along with Bob Terry's, David Reed's, Whiskey 6 Kilo Lima, and our monthly and subscription donors, keep us advert free. If you'd like to help us out, all you need to do is visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you send away is always greatly appreciated. You'll also notice on that page as well, there's a new subscription model where we're looking for sponsors for the new 2019 ICQ Presenter t-shirts, which will debut at Hamvention in Dayton, Ohio, later on this year. So you can sponsor and have your name on the sleeve of the presenter shirts just by filling in the relevant donation model. So check out that page, guys, and we really would appreciate if you could help us out. Well, now we join Martin, Edmund and Bill to discuss latest amateur radio news, including ARRL petitions over the Parity Act and work till Britain turns 50. I hope you enjoy.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
So welcome guys to the ICQ News Roundtable for episode 284. Today, I have a short group of us today because a couple couldn't make it, but we have Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0, MMG, back from quite a long layoff, haven't you, Edmund?
Yes, the beginning of September was the last time I was on a podcast, I think, but the course I was supposed to be attending fizzled out due to lack of other people turning up. So here I am once again. So hello, Martin, and hello to everybody listening.
Yeah, hi, mate, and good to have you back. And as I say, it's going to be fun. We also have Mr. Bill Barnes, N3JIX. Hi, Bill.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Great to be back again.
Yeah, good to have you. Unfortunately, your partner in crime couldn't make it tonight, Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G3TXQ. And Matthew is still doing family things in Spain. He doesn't fly back till next week. So we're a little bit short on the ground, but I'm sure that we can find a few things to keep you entertained. And first news story, and it's a shame Ed's not with us tonight, but Germany are back on 70 megs, are back on 4 meters till the end of 2019. They seem to have been up and down on this quite a lot, don't they, Bill?
Yeah, they do, but at least this time they got 25 watts PAP on the band, a small band, but they get the use of it for the whole year, which is really good. So it'll be interesting to see how the Germans use it and what kind of propagation particularities they're going to figure out over the course of a whole year instead of just the small bands they had before.
Yeah. Well, from my point of view, that part of the band is SSB, CWSSB part of the band plan for the UK. Although we could do FM down there, probably won't find any FM down there. Be interesting to hear what Ed's got to say, but yeah. I like 4 meters. I'll certainly be listening out for them. What do you think, Edmund?
I'll be listening out for them once again, and hopefully I'll actually manage to hear somebody or maybe even work somebody this time. It's good news that the allocation has returned, partly because this time it's for much longer. The last time Germany had it in the summer of 2018, it was allocated for only a few months, as I remember. But this time it's more than a year, isn't it? So that's certainly encouraging. The other piece of good news is that the allocation this time is slightly wider. 70.180 was where the top end of the allocation in the summer, but this time they've got it all the way up to 70.200, and that frequency is you don't have calling frequencies as such on a non-channelized part of the band, but 70.200 is taken to be the SSB and possibly CW as well calling frequency, or near to it, the centre of activity. So if somebody in Germany was calling for a random contact, if they call CQ as close to that frequency as they're allowed to get, then they've got more chance of somebody elsewhere in Europe being in that part of the band and hearing them than would have been the case if they'd been calling out for a random contact, say 20, 30, 40 kilohertz lower down the band. So that's encouraging as well. It ought to be possible from my QTH anyway on the south coast to hear Germany. I've heard and worked amateurs using SSB in the western side and the eastern side of Germany on 6 meters. And I quite often hear broadcast stations in the VHF band 2, from both sides of the country as well, either by tropospheric ducting or short skip sporadic E. So it ought to be possible. Only problem is, I say it's a problem, my dipole in the attic is vertical, and the SWR is 1-to-1. If I mount it horizontally, the SWR goes up. Not to the point that it's unusable, but it goes up higher than I would like it. So I've left it vertically polarized. That would matter, I guess, if I were working Germany via ground wave, if I lived nearer to the country. If the signal's coming in via sporadic E, then polarity probably doesn't matter quite so much. So, yes, listen out for them, work them if you hear them, and I'll let you know how I get on, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all, mate. Well, let's hope we get some contacts. And Bill, back to you just quickly. So it's very much a shame that you guys in the States don't have 4 meters, because more and more rigs now are certainly coming out with 4 meters on them, aren't they?
The ones that are sold overseas, yes. I'm not aware of any over here that have the 4-meter band available without modification. But yeah, you're correct. It's from what I hear from the various folks, like you guys talk about 4 meters, it has, some of the nice properties of 6 plus some of the nice properties of 2, kind of smoothed out, exciting band, quiet band. And yeah, sounds like you end up getting into a lot of rag chews because of the level of activity just wants to keep people, let's talk, which that's really, really cool.
Yeah, you're dead right, Bill, dead right. So let's hope you get it someday. But Germany gets it for a year, so that's good. And let's hope they keep it after that. Now, the next news story, I'm sure we're going to tone it down just a tad, but the ARRL petitions the FCC to incorporate the Parity Act provisions into amateur radio rules. Now, I kind of live outside the States, but I do have a vested interest because I hold a US call sign. And who knows, one day I may live in the States, but why hasn't this actually been put to bed? It's at least 3 years old. Or am I missing something, Bill?
No, you're not really missing anything. This is one of those ideas that the ARRL came up with, that they were going to pass through some legislation to basically override HOA rules. Homeowners associations, for those that are unfamiliar with the term, is a association of small communities, and what they do is they incorporate some rules in there on how they want the houses, how they want you to run your private house and stuff. And in some of these areas, some of them will allow you to have amateur radio antennas. Some do not. I haven't been able to really find any research on, out of, 350,000 homeowners associations in America, 80% of them flat out deny amateur radio. I haven't found any kind of data like that. So this is legislation that they put through the Congress multiple times over here, over multiple sessions, and it's passed the House multiple times and keeps dying in our U.S. Senate. So I think what they're doing this time, in fact, the last time I believe we talked about, they stuck the rules, the proposed legislation for the Amateur Radio Parity Act into the Department of Defense appropriations budget of all things. Well, when the two chambers got together to resolve the differences in the legislation before they sent it to the president to sign, they struck out the provisions of the Parity Act. So for whatever reason, which I'm not sure timing-wise, between the outgoing ARRL board and a third of the board changed coming in here on January 1st, the ARRL filed a proposed petition for rulemaking to the FCC to basically avoid the whole going through Congress thing and just have the FCC write a regulation that just says, hey, you're allowed to put up antennas under the following rules. Now, stepping back briefly here, the last version of the Amateur Radio Parity Act that was floating through Congress, I had a lot of concerns with the verbiage, and one of our new ARRL division directors, Fred Hoppengarden, K1VR, wrote a very good position paper of, what he saw a lot more issues than I saw. And I agree with what he posted as, yes, these are issues with the language. It leaves some loopholes. It might actually set a dangerous precedence. Now, reading what they actually filed with the FCC, it's 57 pages. I read through it once. I don't see the exact same kind of language. I see different language. I didn't see anything that, what's the word I'm looking for, jumped out at me as, this is bad. But likewise, I'm waiting to see some other folks that read over this 57-page FCC filing and see if there's anything in there that are concerning. Because I know at one point they specifically said in here, they were specifically talking about HF as one component, VHF and UHF as another component, which is good because that was one of the things with the Parity Act I immediately jumped out on was you could in theory say, yeah, you can have a VHF, UHF antenna on your roof and that's it. And nothing for HF. So I'm still looking through this, and I'm, it's going to take a couple of reads, and I made some notes here and stuff, but I'm still working my way through it. This came out on the 19th, I believe. Yeah, it was filed on December 17th, and I was made aware of it on the 19th. So I've only, like I said, got one reading through this thing. It could be a good thing. It really depends on how it's phrased and how it's eventually implemented into Part 97, and if there's any legal challenges come up. Because that's always, every agency here that writes regulations, it seems like some of it ends up getting challenged in the court system and it gets put on hold for a long time anyway. So back to your original question, I don't think this is going to put this to bed. I think this is the beginning of another long period of uncertainty as what's going to happen here with the ARRL's Parity Act, Amateur Radio Parity Act.
All right. So, yeah, as you say, it sounds like it's going to be a long, drawn-out thing to happen. Edmund, we're off to the States this year, later in the year. Have you anything on this one, or do you want to duck out?
Bearing in mind I have never yet set foot on American soil, and I'm very much looking forward to it, by the way. There is absolutely nothing I can say to add to this whatsoever.
Yeah, well, thanks on that one. It's a very difficult one, and one that I'm kind of interested in because I do hold a US call sign. and I kind of try and keep abreast of what's going on out there, although I do rely very heavily on Bill, Dan and Frank to put me right on certain things, and say off air, Bill's put me right on quite a few things tonight, so let's hope this gets sorted, and the quicker the better. I
believe the proper term is rant.
Yeah?
I was ranting.
No, you wasn't ranting. You was explaining.
It didn't come across as a rant. It didn't come across
felt
as
like
a
it.
rant
I felt bad
to me, Bill. But I was just wondering, Martin, given that you hold a full license in the UK and you can operate under the CT agreement, and as far as I know, you have no plan.
Well, the problem was, and let's be honest about it up front, there were a number of reasons, a couple I won't go into on air, but the main reason was I was sitting on Cyprus one day with Colin, and we'd had a couple of bottles of the brown nectar, and he said to me, "Here, Dad, it'd be good if you got an American license, because then you'd understand it." And God, it's got to be dead easy, because all American questions, you get all the answers to all the questions before you sit in the exam. So, like most British hams, we all thought the American license was easy. Once I started reading the books, actually, I learnt quite a bit, and there's a different set of concepts, because the US are allowed to use lots more power and one thing and another. It became just an interesting thing to do it, Edmund. Well, guys, the next news story. There's a call for applications for youngsters on the air to go to Bulgaria in 2019, this year. Now, my experience of youngsters on the air was when I attended the RSGB event a couple of years ago up at Gilwell Park, and I absolutely think this is something that really, really should happen every year, and I think the whole world should be involved. So, Bill, what's your thoughts on youngsters on the air? And in many ways, I feel it's a shame that the US can't take part in a big way on this one.
Yeah, I really wish we had it over here. I know various folks have talked about it over the last few years, but the interesting thing with this one, it's going to be in Bulgaria. It's going to be over the summer 2019, but they're actually going to do a train-the-trainer program. So that means that the youth that go over there are going to, learn how to train others, assuming, amateur radio topics, and getting them involved in YOTA. So I'm hoping that at some point we get some folks from here get this going and jumping in on there as well, because it's very, very interesting, and I think it's a wonderful program.
Yeah, I agree with you. And if they are doing trainers so that they can get the youngsters training other youngsters, that is a real big plus, because, the thing about a lot of this is if you've got passionate people in, and these will be passionate people about amateur radio, and it'll be a life-changing event wherever it's held, I think to train the trainers or train them in the techniques of putting across what amateur radio is all about is a great thing. Now, I agree with you, Bill. I think it's a great, great opportunity, and let's hope the youngsters manage to grab it with both hands. But YOTA also happens right throughout the month of December, and during the month of December, some US radio amateurs helped to make YOTA month happen in Ethiopia. Now, we don't have too much of a story on this one, but nice to hear that a couple of guys from your country, Bill, were out there in Ethiopia and helped a number of youngsters get on the air.
Yes, that's very exciting. Ken Clarabot, K4ZW, and Bob Johnson, W9XY, traveled to Ethiopia and got help some young members of the Ethiopian Amateur Radio Society to use the ET3AA station as ET3 YOTA, and they got them on, and they were on 20 SSB with a little bit of 160 and a little bit of 40. I guess they also did a little bit of FT8, but the whole thing is just great. They got things going and got them on the air for YOTA activation. Now, one thing the article did mention, which I found interesting, the Ethiopian government hasn't issued any new licenses in some years. So it's the tricky thing to get this whole thing going anyway. So they really, stepped up and got these students on the air and got them active, which is, very, very, very interesting. And I'm very happy for them.
Well, I suppose if there's not been interest and activity, and if a hobby had almost died in a country and you're not bringing youth through in to fill that void at the bottom, yeah, the hobby would sort of almost die, and I suppose that's probably why they haven't issued licenses. So let's hope this helps issue the licenses there, Bill. Edmund, what's your thoughts on this one?
I don't ever recall hearing an amateur radio signal or a shortwave broadcast signal for that matter, directly from Ethiopia anyway. So I don't really rate my chances of working these stations, not with the antennas I've got anyway, but to know that activity is on the air from a rarely activated country is good news indeed. So I wish them the best of luck with it.
Yeah, well, I think that's good, and it just proves that people are out there wanting to bring the youngsters through. Moving on to our next news story. Ofcom makes ham radio G5 plus 3 letter calls available. Now, I think Bill will probably be snoring in the corner because it's really a UK thing, but quite honestly, I'm getting so confused with all this, Edmund. I used to understand it. Now I don't. What's your thoughts, mate?
Well, yes, we have this news story, hot on the news story, that M5s were being issued. We covered that, didn't we, within the last month or two? I seem to remember, were there some 2 Echo 0 plus 2 letter call signs being issued as well? I seem to remember. So the whole thing seems to have either gone off the rails or been liberalised in a most wonderfully chaotic way. The M0 series, which is the current UK full licence, has been being issued since, I think, the mid to late 90s. So the M0 series will be pretty full by now, I would guess. So maybe the G5 is what takes over from M0, given that out of all the Gs and numbers, G5 is probably, I would guess, the one with the fewest call signs on issue already, by which I mean I'm sure there are far fewer G5s than there are G0s, G1s, G3s, G4s, and so forth. So that could have something to do with it, but why that and why now, if it's not to do with M0 being filled up, I don't know. And why did they choose G5 rather than M2, M4, M8, or something along those lines, which haven't been issued yet? So, yes, an already complicated system, and working out in the UK, working out who got licensed when, what their privileges were, is probably one of the most complicated systems anywhere in the world, and that has now got more complicated still. It's all good fun, isn't it, Martin?
Yeah, kind of. It is good fun. I was talking to a guy, I'm not going to embarrass him, but he knows who he is, that was talking to me about getting a G5 call sign at the Cat's Bazaar. And he was saying that if you set his interpretation was if you set up a club and you only need like 3 members to be in the club, you could pretty much ask for a G5 call sign. And the joke was, why don't you apply for G5 at ICQ? No, I don't want any more. No more call signs. But No, I just don't understand why the system anymore. It just seems such a mess. Bill, have you finished snoring in the background? Hi.
Actually, I wasn't snoring. I went out to Club Log and looked if I have Ethiopia. Because Edmund said he doesn't think he's ever heard them, but I actually worked 9 Echo 1 Charlie on 20 meters and 17 meters August 22nd of 2000. It's been a while. But there are ones that are listed as my DXCC click for Ethiopia. But what does that have to do with G5 calls? Absolutely nothing. Other than I know one amateur who is living outside of Britain who would really not be great if he had a G5 call if he upgraded to his full license. But that's neither here or there. It is very confusing. I'm sure the scheme made sense at one point, and it's just not there. And I would really like to find somebody on the inside of Ofcom and just buy them a tea or something and sit down and find out what goes through their minds sometimes. Because I'm sure there is a perfectly rational reason why they picked G5 as being available versus anything else. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. I just don't understand. But hey, Hump. Just to warn people, if you start hearing G5s, the GQRP Club have got G5 low, which is an interesting call sign for them. If you hear them on the air, please work them. But equally, you will hear some more G5s, I would suggest. Moving on, a special prefix for Switzerland. So, no longer will I be hearing HB9 for Switzerland, because HB9 stations may use the prefix HB90 because of the 90th anniversary. Together with HB3 stations, and I didn't realise there was any HB3 stations, can prefix as HB30. Don't understand that one fully, but hey hum. Bill, what's your thoughts?
Prefix hunting can be a real fun activity. And it is really nice that they got to their 90th anniversary. So I think it's really neat. Yeah, I can't explain the HB30 either, but I'll be listening for both and hopefully work some of the Swiss stations over the course of the year. I mean, this is a good year, and it's going to be it'll be fun to have somebody to chase after. So good on them for that.
Yeah. It makes our hobby interesting when they change the old call sign prefixes, doesn't it? Edmund, what's your thoughts?
I often log with pen and paper, so I don't have a problem with unusual prefixes. I don't know if some of the logging programs might get a bit confused. HB3, I've got a feeling, is possibly the equivalent of the Class B VHF UHF license, which is why I've never heard an HB3 on HF. And I don't think I've ever been close enough to Switzerland to work anybody on VHF. Well, not recently anyway. So, yes, it's just putting a 0 in, isn't it? And HB90 I get, if it's the 90th anniversary. It kind of falls off for HB30, doesn't it? But I can see why they've done it. So, yes, I will be listening as well.
Yeah, no problems. Well, maybe we'll get you to Friedrichshafen one year, Edmund. You come into Dayton with us. If I bring you back in one piece, maybe Paula won't be quite so worried about you coming on a boys' trip to Friedrichshafen. And that Friedrichshafen is down there on the German-Austria-Swiss border with the lake in front of you. So you could actually work all three countries if you come one year with us. So that'll be nice. Last news story, and I still like this. Work Tool Britain turns 50. In 2019, marks the 50th anniversary of the Work Tool Britain group. Now, they are a very interesting bunch. I kind of hold a Work Tool Britain book, so I've got a Work Tool Britain number. Don't ask me what it is, because I need to go and find it, but I do have one, and it's nice. They work very hard at promoting this. And what do you think, Edmund?
Yes, there's a couple of anniversaries in 2019. It's Worked All Britain's 50th and by Lara, the British Young Ladies Amateur Radio Association's 40th. So maybe they could do something together. I don't know. Worked All Britain is a bit of a phenomenon. I've got a book as well. Offhand, I can't remember what my book number is either. But I do know that people operating the special event stations linked to Worked All Britain in 2019 are certainly going to have their hands full. The one and only time I've ever been involved with WAB was back in 2012 during the Follow the Torch event when the Olympic torch went round the UK. And a group of us, we had the call sign for one day. We set up an HF station on a hilltop somewhere overlooking the road where the torch was going to go. We turned the radio to 7.160, which is the Worked All Britain centre of activity frequency on 40 metres. And we didn't even call CQ. I think somebody, was it me or somebody else, can't remember, whoever held the microphone, simply said, "This is Golf X-Ray 4, Whiskey Alpha Bravo / portable testing for SWR. Is the frequency in use?" or words to that effect. The word CQ did not pass anybody's lips, and there was an instant pile-up. There was like this wall of noise that just came out of the radio's loudspeaker, and I don't think we actually had to say CQ at any point during the day. It was continuous pile-up. Or at the very least, one person tail-ending as the previous QSO finished. So if the people operating these WAB special event stations have anything like that, then boy, are they going to be popular and in demand and have their hands full. And the other thing, we mentioned amateur radio prefixes just now. One of the call signs, Golf Bravo 9 Whiskey Alpha Bravo, is very unusual, because with the exception of Golf Bravo 9 RAF in 2018, there haven't been, that I'm aware of, any other special event stations that begin with the prefix GB9. So they'll be rare and they'll be in demand. So good luck anybody who tries to work them. And in a good way, I kind of feel a bit sorry for the operators who are going to be on the other end of the multitude of pile-ups. But I'm sure everybody will have fun. And congratulations to WAB on reaching half a century. And best of luck to all the amateurs out there who'll be chasing after those call signs, Martin.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's nice you mentioned by Lara's, because the British Young Lady Amateur Radio Association, great bunch. Judith, who's the president, I know she's married to somebody who's quite high up in WAB. So the two are quite linked together as groups. And, you know, they do a really, really good job of bringing these things together. And the awards have kind of been copied in other parts of the world. Certainly in Ireland, there's a Worked All Ireland. I'm not saying that the Worked All States was a copy of Worked All Britain bill, but you've also got the Worked All States award, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. I just cashed in my Logbook of the World credits for Worked All States back 3 or 4 months ago, and got a whole bunch of wallpaper for Worked All States, because I had it for a long time. I just never cashed it in until recently. But gosh, Martin, well, now I'm sitting here looking at this thing: squares, books, large squares, decades, islands, WAB call signs, DXCC countries, trig points, Excel spreadsheets to track this. Now you're going to get me chasing another award.
Well, last episode they talked about another awards scheme being Worked All postcodes that one of the dealers in the UK is trying to set up. So there's lots of interesting things to do if you're an amateur radio.
Yeah, that is definitely true. There's a lot of stuff going on. Also, I believe this year is the 2019 is Canadian Parks on the air as well. So there's going to be a lot of I hope there's a lot of activity this year.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I don't hear much going on our side of the pond, but it'll be good apart from the Worked All Britain. So We'll see. Let's hope the propagation improves and the world is a better place in 2019. Okay, well, that concludes our news stories. Just a quick run round today to see what we've all been up to. Bill, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you. Since the last time we chatted, I upgraded my WS-JTX to the version 2.0, and I worked a dozen and a half FT8 stations. So that works fine. I mean, and I have seen some compound call signs now, which is interesting, but it works them and everything's fine, so that's good. Listening to Dan, after I did so horribly bad on the CW contest, I actually signed up for the CW Ops Level 1 course. And I just got an email the other day that it looks like April, May for that class. So I'm giving her a shot. We'll see how it goes. Another thing I jumped into was Linux and the Ham Shack podcast had an end of year roundtable. So I jumped in there and had some fun. That was an interesting chat with some Linux folks that are also hams. And I briefly, as you recall, jumped into the Zello group Unboxing Day. That worked remarkably well, and I'm sure you'll talk about it when it's your turn. We had 14 or 15 folks in there at the time I was in there, and it worked fine for network radio. That worked good. I also filed a brief comment on our request modification, or whatever RM stands for, 11708 and 11759 for removing the 300 baud limit on HF data signals and go by signal bandwidth, which you guys discussed last week on the round table, or not 2 weeks ago on the round table. Just let's move on. Let's evolve the technology and remove the regulations that are preventing us from getting different stuff done. So I posted my opinion on that as well, and it's a huge amount of comments on that. I feel bad for whoever's going to have to go through all this stuff that works at the FCC. But other than that, that's all I've been through. We had the holidays, and that had a lot of travel and stuff in there, and so now we're back and ready for the new year.
Well, that sounds good, Bill. Sounds like you've had a lot of fun, and as I say, keep up the good work. You've done a lot. Edmund, you were on the network radio group on Boxing Day, the 26th of December, but tell us what you've been up to.
Oh, it's not real radio, bar humbug. Merry Christmas to you all. Yes, I quite enjoyed that, coming into the ICQ podcast room, if that's the right word. I downloaded Zello onto my laptop specially. I also have updated the WS-JTX software on my laptop to version 2.0, although I've still yet to make or receive a transmission in that mode. So quite why I updated software that I've never actually used, I don't really know, just because I could, I suppose. In terms of radio involving RF and voice, I've not done an awful lot of it recently. The 40-meter inverted V dipole has now had its winter extensions clipped onto the end of it, so it's now an 80-meter dipole. Unfortunately, I've had very few contacts outside of nets, simply because not long after I clipped the extensions on, all the neighbours started putting up all their fairy lights. And even though we're recording this after Christmas has come and gone, most of the Christmas decorations and fairy lights are still up and switched on. So my noise floor on 80 metres has gone through the ceiling. So basically, anybody, for me to hear them, has to be about 5 and 9 plus 20 to get over top of that lot. I'm hoping in the next week or so, as Christmas becomes a more and more distant memory, that the noise floor will drop back to the more usual S4 or S5 for 80 metres. So then I can maybe have some QSOs. That would be nice. The Worthing District Amateur Radio Club GX1WOR, I'm still using the club call sign to work the world on 2 meters, and that included talking to your good self, Martin, when you were in the local area. a few days back. I had intended to stop on the 31st of December, but the club's first year of existence was between September 1948 and September 1949, so I am going to carry on until at least September 2019 to coincide with the club's first year of existence. And I took a few videos when I was out and about doing activations, so there'll be a video going up on YouTube quite shortly. Just search for the call sign GX1WOR. And last but not least, special event stations. We are going to do a special event superstation, call sign Golf Bravo 5. Don't hear many Golf Bravo 5s. That is out of the ordinary, so that's why we chose it. Golf Bravo 5 Whiskey Oscar Romeo, the weekend of the 19th, 20th, 21st, somewhere around there, whatever the dates are. 48 hours non-stop, all HF bands, full UK legal limit. So if you want to work us on top band at 3 o'clock in the morning, then we will be there. We're doing that from the University of Sussex, where they've got some pretty respectable HF antennas and some rather nice equipment as well. So please do listen out for GB5WOR on the third weekend in January. It's the 19th, 20th, 21st, somewhere around there. And that's all I'm doing.
What do you mean that's all you're doing? That's a hell of a lot. And that really sounds fun, that superstation you're going to do. Maybe I might pop down, but no promises. Well, as the guy said, we mentioned on the last podcast, or the last couple of podcasts, we were going to do it. We actually held a network radio group on the 26th of December. I counted 13 people who actually took part, with a lot of other people that were logged in but didn't want to call in. They were just listening. So I think it was a lot more listening from what I could see. 13 people, 6 presenters, 7 listeners, 6 countries. That was 6 countries involved. So all in all, those that took part thoroughly enjoyed themselves and have asked us to do it again. I think that we won't do it too regular, but probably every 3 months, if we'll maybe have a go and get this network radio chat just going, because I think it was well received by all those that took part, and more people are always welcome. I did a little bit of operating over the Christmas period, unfortunately not as much as I'd like, but as Edmund said, I did work him. I was on my way down to Edmund's part of the world where Colin's brother lives to see the family, and I give Edmund a shout, and we had a good contact for about 10 minutes while I was mobile, simplex, so that was pretty good, and I enjoyed that. I've been repairing my scope. I bought a scope at the Cat's Bazaar, and I want to turn it into a signature tracer, but the problem was I need to get the scope working properly, and the circuit diagrams on the internet are really poor. So I've written off to the manufacturer, see if they've got any documentation available. It is a very old scope, so it's unlikely, I expect, but we're worth our go. So that's kind of what I've been up to. And the last thing, I had some good Christmas presents. I hate my feet being cold. I've got a couple of really nice pairs of warm socks when I'm out and about in the field. And I got a on-air sign. I bought an on-air sign with my call sign that lights up, and it all lights up, and a radio t-shirt. So thoroughly enjoyed what I got for Christmas. But just going back for when I flew gliders for a year, you could always tell the best pilot on the airfield, because he was the one in the middle of winter who had the worst dress sense. And as amateur radio people, if we're going to go and sit out in a field or operate out in the cold, make sure you keep yourself warm, and these warm socks are going to be absolutely ideal. So that's me done. I think we've all had a bit of fun, and good on us. I'd like to thank Mr. Bill Barnes for joining us, M3JIX.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Bill. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MNG.
Thanks for having me back after all this time, Martin.
No problems, mate. You know that. And I'm glad we have you back. All right, then I'll say 73s, and we'll do it all again another time.
73s.
7-3.
Hi, Mrs. B here. Please sign up to our newsletter. We won't share your data and only send you relevant podcast information. We thank you for your support. 73's Mrs. B.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. We start with news of a new EU directive that requires all new car radios sold inside the European Union to be capable of receiving a digital terrestrial radio. So this has been passed at the European Parliament and Council. They've adopted this new European Electronic Communications Code, which along with addition of FM and AM functionality also requires this digital code to be granted. The adoption of this comes into force from this year. So it looks like this will be going forward, that all car radios sold inside the European Union will have to have the capability of digital terrestrial radio. So we put a link to this, the regulations, etc. on the ICQ podcast website. The FCC has reached a settlement in relation to unauthorized satellite launches. This was taken against Swarm Technologies. The company agreed to a consent decree that included a $900,000 penalty, an extended period of FCC oversight, and the requirement of pre-launch notices to the FCC. So the FCC have basically here that they will aggressively enforce the FCC's requirements that companies that seek FCC authorization prior to deploying and operating communication satellites and Earth stations. These are important obligations to protect other operators and against radio interference and collisions, making space a safer place to operate. So we got the full information and the judgment links, etc. on the ICQpodcast.com website. And we finish off here with sad news that S.E. Hunt, G3 Tango X-Ray Quebec, has passed away after a long battle with cancer. He became a silent key on Sunday the 30th of December 2018. Steve originally designed the G3TXQ broadband hex beam, as well as the author of various articles on RF chokes. We've popped a link to his blog, which includes lots of amateur radio information, plus also his diary on fighting cancer, which you can get from the ICQ podcast webpage. We wish, thoughts and prayers, wishes go to his family, and condolences go your way. Well, now we head over to our features episode, which is a feature on workshop projects. I hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well, hi guys. I thought I'd give you an insight into what I've been up to over the last few weeks and some of the workshop projects I've been working on. Now, I suppose it's the fact that I'm getting old age that I get more and more worried about doing some of the gung-ho things I did when I was much younger. And in fairness, I've probably survived when I shouldn't have done a few times. So, quite honestly, if you're going to do some of these, please be aware that mains voltage can kill. If you are anyway unsure of this, don't do it. If you're unsure, please don't attempt any of this. If you don't feel comfortable, it's outside your comfortable zone, don't do it. This is not all about high power, but I will talk about high power stuff as well. So please, safety is the number one important thing. Enjoy your radio, enjoy our podcast, but make sure you're safe. Well, I've been, for a long time, had some mains voltage projects that I want to work on. And for years, I've been quite successful. I'm quite happy working on high voltage. But a few years ago, I got given a nice variac. Now, a variac is a device that allows you to adjust the mains voltage. So for argument's sake, here in the UK, our UK mains voltage is 230 volts. Technically, if I had a piece of equipment from the US, I could plug it into my variac and set the mains voltage on my Variac to 110 volt, and it will work all right. It's 50 hertz and 60 hertz, so there'll be a frequency difference, but the voltage I could get to within the correct voltage for the device. Now, a Variac is effectively an auto transformer usually, and in fairness, it doesn't do any isolating. All it does is give you a variable AC source from pretty much 0 up to usually above the line voltage in your particular country. So just be aware of it. You can go in the UK over 230 volts, and sometimes you may need to do so. Now, the next piece of device that I've purchased not so long ago was an isolating transformer. Big one, and I was quite pleased when I found it. But why do I want an isolating transformer? Well, if I'm working on a piece of high voltage equipment, there's a number of ways you can get a shock. You can get a shock via obviously touching across the live and neutral, or you could maybe get a shock between the live and another piece of metalwork that's connected to the ground. So with an isolating transformer, what we're doing is we're removing the ground insulation socket, so that on the remote end, the piece where the equipment is connected, I only have live and neutral. The isolating transformer, the case on mine, I want to have that earthed because I don't want a problem there. But from the socket out to the device I'm working on, I want that to be insulated from the earth connection back to the supply. Reason for that is that in many cases, and most cases in actual fact, the live and the neutral will be connected at some point, either in your house or fairly close to it. So they are at the same potential. So I want to break that insulation back to earth, so that I'm isolated from the supply. The next device is I've been playing with, and I've been meaning to make one of these for a long time, and it's an AC current limiter. What a fancy name for a light bulb. An incandescent light bulb. Effectively, you'll find various circuits on the internet, but effectively if you take a light bulb and a 60 or 100 watt light bulb, and you put it in series with the device that you're powering up, that allows you to effectively limit the current. Because think about it, if you've got a short circuit, if the device goes short circuit under high voltage, there's a breakdown, the light bulb effectively will light up bright, because that's what the circuit is, live through the light bulb back to neutral. So if it glows really, really bright, you know your device has a problem. If it doesn't glow, then you know, or it's very, very dim, then there's a fair good chance that your device is perfectly okay. But it is a current limiter, so can be quite useful, but you do have to realise there is actually a volt drop across the bulb. So the more current being drawn, the greater the volt drop, but there will be a volt drop across the bulb. So it'll allow you to work on devices without blowing the fuse effectively. Now, it also has another advantage, and I did a silly thing the other day. I slipped with a probe and shorted the AC to ground, and effectively all that happened was that the bulb lit up absolutely bright, which alerted me to obviously I'd done something silly. But the minute I removed the short, the light went out, but I'd blown none of the fuses because all the power had been developed across the light bulb. So worth doing. Now my one, I have on a piece of board, I have a light socket, a proper light socket, which is in line with the live circuit. But I also have a switch, an on-off switch across the light bulb as well. So I can either have the switch open circuit, in which case the circuit goes through the light bulb, or when I'm happy everything's okay, I can switch the light bulb out of circuit by just switching the switch. Once again, very, very cheap thing you can make, and actually quite very, very useful. How many times do you quickly measure resistance and go, oh, that looks all right? But you bear in mind, you're only measuring at very, very low voltages. When you put high voltage on things, they often break down. And a device like this, which is really, really cheap to make, effectively saves you blowing fuses, but it also gives you a warning. And the scope I was actually fixing, when I got to 200 volts, I cranked the variac up slowly and got to about 200 volts, and it was starting to light the bulb. Not overly bright, but more than I would have expected. So I obviously knew I had a problem with something in the device. So I turned the voltage down, did a quick check round, and in actual fact, a simple check, I actually put my fingers on the side of the smoothing cans, the smoothing capacitors, and one of them was getting hot. So that was the one that was drawing current. So a very useful little device. But as I've just said, please, 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 if you are unsure of working on high voltages, do not attempt it. I'm not giving you the go-ahead to do this. You have to be safe. You have to be okay with your own capabilities. And nobody's going to give you grief if you decide that it's too dangerous. Anybody calls you a chicken is stupid, because you have to be safe in your mind. Okay, my next project I was working on in the lab, the workshop, was for years I've wanted an AF/RF signal tracer, and I thought I'm going to make one. And the reason for it is I use the oscilloscope quite a lot, but our hearing is logarithmic. So our hearing's logarithmic, and an oscilloscope is a linear device. So if you're looking for a noisy component, it's not easy to pick it up on an oscilloscope unless it's really, really noisy. So what I wanted was a signal tracer to be able to do this. And I am denied. I've looked at rallies to buy one or one thing or another. And then suddenly I had a light bulb moment that went on in my head and thought, hang on a minute, what is a signal tracer? It's a probe with an audio amplifier. What can I find at rallies quite regularly that people just don't want or throw out, which are perfectly useful? A set of computer speakers. So I got myself a set of computer speakers, which are effectively exactly what I wanted. And all I needed to do was build the probe. Now, a quick search on the internet and you can look for lots of different probes, but the one I went for effectively is an audio RF probe. And if I take you through the circuit very quickly, in line on the live circuit, the signal path, you have a 0.01 capacitor. Now, this 0.01 capacitor, if you're using it on mains equipment or valve equipment, you probably want a 600 volt working cap. If you're only ever going to be working on low voltage equipment, then you can get away with a much, much lower capacitor. In the earth side, or the neutral side of the test probe, you also put a capacitor, and in this case it was a 0.047 capacitor. 0.047 just breaks the earth lead on the probe, but it works very well, so it stops hum pickup and things like that. So once again, if you're on valve equipment, use a very high voltage capacitor, say 630 volt capacitor. If you're transistor only, then effectively you don't have to worry too much. You get much lower capacitor, say 100 or 200 volt working capacitor will work fine. Across the signal lead, you have around about a 2 meg ohm resistor. So from the signal to the ground, you have a 2 meg ohm load resistor. And if you want to then be able to measure RF, because what I've told you so far will be perfectly fine for AF signals, but if you want to measure RF, what you can then do is put a small signal diode across the 2 meg resistor, but effectively open circuit one end of it so that with a switch, so you can either switch it in or switch it out. So when it's switched out of circuit, the probe acts as an AF probe. When it's in circuit, when you switch and make the connection so the diodes across the rail, effectively that demodulates the signal and allows you to hear audio off an RF signal. So very, very simple. Don't want to teach you to suck eggs because it's a very, very simple little probe. The beauty of it is it works for me, and with a set of cheap computer speakers, it was a very, very cheap option. So quite useful. Now the last thing I've been playing with in the workshop is a very cheap capacitors checker, and I spotted this on YouTube, and I was working away, and a gentleman was saying you could build a test capacitor checker for electrolytic capacitors. Well, it'll work with other capacitors, but certainly electrolytic capacitors with a handful of components. And when I say a handful of components, I really do mean a handful of components. Now, this device will work up to about 50 volts. And for most transistorized gear, you don't need more than 50 volts. And 50 volts is still just about within the safe region. So you should be okay with this one. But once again, only if you feel comfortable. Now, what you end up doing is you have a 50 volt supply. Through that, you have you put a capacitor in series with a 50 volt supply, then through a 10k resistor to an LED to earth. And effectively, what happens is when the power goes on, the capacitor charges and there will be current flow, and it flows obviously through the 10k resistor, through the LED, lights up the LED. When the capacitor's charged, it stops the LED lighting up, and you've got a good capacitor. Now, there's a couple other things you need to do. You need to put a diode across the LED in the reverse direction. This is there to stop the LED being reverse biased. Because if you take a capacitor that's already charged and you stick it into the circuit, you could end up trying to reverse bias the LED, and they don't like being reverse biased very much. So you will blow the hell out of it. But it works very well. Now, I said all you need is a 10k resistor, which is the current limiter for the LED, a 1M418 across the LED. The LED, I didn't have the ones that the guy suggested, but it's certainly worth doing. But I used an ordinary LED just to prove the circuit worked. He suggests using an indium gallium nitrate LED because they will light at very low current. So if you've got one of those LEDs, it will light at a low current, and you'll see if you've got any leakage. Now, if it's a brand new capacitor, it might show leakage because it might need reforming, and you might need to reform your capacitor. But in fairness, I had a couple of capacitors that I put on this little circuit, and one of them took a long time to go out the first time, possibly because it hadn't had any voltage across it and it hadn't formed. But once I'd done it a couple of times, it worked perfectly okay. Now, if I wasn't going to just breadboard this, I'd add 2 more components and then put it into a box. The other 2 components I'd put would be a dual pole switch, and I'd put in a resistor to discharge the capacitor. So I'd have an on switch to switch on to charge the capacitor, and then when you switch off, I'd switch in circuit and another resistor to ground that would just effectively remove the voltage and discharge the capacitor, because effectively you don't want to be discharging the capacitor by sticking it on a bit of metal plate or across a screwdriver. It don't do the capacitor much good in the long term. One last thing on this project, when I mentioned the 50 volt supply, if you use a variable power supply from say 5 volts up to 50 volts, you could then test capacitors of any working value up to 50 volts. If you obviously got a 25 volt working capacitor, don't put 50 volts across it unless you want to see a big bang. So use the correct voltage for the capacitor you're checking. So just 3 projects I've been working on. I hope they've been interesting to you. And once again, I really must emphasize this. If you don't feel safe working on high voltage, please do not do it. You're doing this at your own risk, but I'd rather you remain safe if you don't feel comfortable. 73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Well, thanks, Dad, for your feature there on workshop projects, and I'm sure, as always, it's something to titillate and excite people on what they can potentially do on that part of the hobby. So thanks a lot for that part of the feature there. As always, we'd like to thank our donors who keep the podcast show advert free. So to Luke Ulrich, Alpha Delta 0 Kilo India, Bob Terry and David Reed, Whiskey 6 Kilo Lima. They, along with our monthly and annual subscription donors, say they've kept your show advert free for you today. So if you'd like to help out, visit icqpodcast.com/donate. Whereas we always say, anything you can send away is always greatly appreciated. While you're there, considering having your name as a sponsor on the new ICQ podcast t-shirts for the presenters, so you can get involved there by following the link and subscribing away there. Right, okay, feedback time here, and ironically, Bill Barnes, who was with us earlier on in the News Roundtable, popped us a mail after the last episode, and we really got him going, along with some other listeners as well, on the ICQpodcast.com webpage in relation to the news story on national security risks with amateur radio violations. So Bill had actually been keeping an eye on this one and was a little bit disappointed that he'd missed his, or this story had missed his turn on the round table. But he said he's really ticked off about the guy who's attracting unneeded attention to our hobby with some senator is going to read the term amateur radio is being used for terrorists and shut down the hobby here. So right off the bat, he's wrong in his assertions. Pactor documented only Pactor 3 and 4 is SCS hardware only. If you have a Pactor 4 modem, you can listen in on Pactor 4 signals. WinLink, this is not a transmission scheme. It is an application run over various HF protocols. And it says this is making him sound like he doesn't really know what he's talking about. The ARRDOP, the Amateur Radio Digital Open Protocol, it is open and that's the point of it. He also has mentioned that WinMore is a radio protocol, an alternative to external Pactor hardware that works with a PC sound card to provide a virtual TNC, enabling throughput performance approaching Pactor 2. And Stagnet, I think STANAG is a NATO protocol, so he's not sure why it's doing on the amateur bands. And that as well, but he refers to a couple of quotes regarding this guy's conversations with the FBI and FCC officials, but as always with these things, he hasn't named them. Bill says, well, if he contacted his local FBI department in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, he's pretty much sure they wouldn't have a clue about anything regarding decoding signals. As always, these things, obviously, you forward it to the right departments. Also, as well, the guy made reference to vendors of amateur radio equipment who told me they're concerned about the purchase of amateur radio gear for criminal cartels. And as Bill says, say who name them because they're not allowed to sell amateur radio equipment to non-hams in the USA, and this is an offence. But that didn't only just whet Bill's appetite, it also whet the appetite of amateurs, Galen Grant, Dick Boyle, an anonymous poster who's, posted some interesting articles on the podcast, as well as JD Una. So quite interesting as well there. But I think the biggest thing on this one as well is going for a lot of this is about we need to continue the education of our hobby and make sure obviously that news reports like that aren't used as a weapon or a stick to remove our hobby away for maybe a commercial reason. Wouldn't you agree, Dad?
Yeah, I think he did very well reading Bill's email. I spoke to Bill. He had steam coming out of his ears, which is a real shame, and it does sometimes be that people who do some of these things, like Bill would have been good to have had on that particular day. It always seems to be when we have an article about Germany, Ed's not on, which is a real shame. But I think we did right covering it. I think the rant is good. We've learnt more from it. And the point of the ICQ podcast is, it is by amateurs for amateurs, or for amateurs by amateurs. You have your right to tell us. You have the right to say, please correct if we get it wrong. We won't get upset. The feedback is good, isn't it, Colin?
Oh, true. And I noted that as well, but obviously this starts the conversation going, if we all stick our head in the sand and we think the whole world's great, then obviously this what happens is the fact that pressure gets put on our hobby and we're not working to protect ourselves. So, no, I think it was well worthwhile covering, and I say great feedback as well on the ICQ podcast website. Check that out, and certainly something there for you to comment upon and get involved with if you wish to. Right, okay, just checking through here. We need to thank Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, and Bill November 3, Julia India X-Ray for taking part in the News Roundtable with you. As always, check out the ICQ podcast website and put your comment upon the news stories and the information that you heard today. I really would appreciate you doing it. Our Facebook group is there for you as well to get involved in, as well as taking time to check out the videos on YouTube at youtube.com/ICQ podcast. So always great to have you guys going there. Right, one last thing to do, and that's to get that kettle on and make a cup of tea. We've gone a little bit long on the 73s, so we better make sure you get that kettle on pretty fast.
I certainly will, Colin. Certainly will. We'll make a cup of tea and a biscuit for Mrs. B when she gets home. And not going to tell you when, guys. Going to keep you thinking. But Mrs. B is joining us at an event later in the year. So be aware. She will be at one of our events, won't she, Colin?
She will. And I've been told I've got to get her a new orange T-shirt as well. So we'll see if we can get one on the run for her as well. So no problems at all. Well, look, we'll bid you all guys a great fortnight, and we'll catch you again in a fortnight's time. 73's all.
Yeah, 73.